The ovens were still warm when the first scream started echoing through the industrial district. I remember standing in the production floor of Peterson's wholesale bakery, watching through the reinforced delivery bay windows as my driver, Marcus, sprinted back from his morning route. His truck sat abandoned 3 blocks away, driver's side door hanging open like a broken jaw. He was shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass, his arms waving frantically above his head. Behind him, shuffling through the pre-dawn darkness, came shapes that moved wrong, too jerky, too determined, too hungry. I slammed my fist against the emergency door release. Marcus crashed through the entrance, and I brought the industrial loading gate down so hard the metal shrieked. He collapsed against a flour pallet, chest heaving, eyes wild with something I'd never seen in another person before, pure animal terror. "They're eating people, Derek," he gasped, gripping my forearm with flour-dusted hands. I saw them tear apart Mrs. Chen outside her restaurant. She was signing for the morning delivery, and then, Jesus Christ, Derek, they just started eating. The power flickered twice before stabilizing. Through the small security windows, I watched the sun rise over a city that was already dying. Smoke columns twisted into the orange sky from at least 7 different points. The emergency broadcast system screamed from Marcus's phone. Something about staying indoors, about martial law, about an ongoing crisis situation. The words kept cutting out, replaced by that bone-chilling alert tone that would become the soundtrack to the end of civilization. I had 16,000 pounds of flour in my storage silos, 12 commercial deck ovens that could run 24 hours a day, a deep well that drew from an aquifer 300 feet down, connected to its own filtration system, backup generators with enough diesel to run for 6 weeks, industrial mixing equipment that could process dough for thousands of loaves, 5,000 pounds of salt yeast cultures I maintained myself, and enough various ingredients to keep production going for months if I rationed carefully. I was standing in the most valuable fortress in the apocalypse, and I didn't even realize it yet. If you've ever wondered what you'd do when the world ended, keep watching, because I'm about to show you how bread became more valuable than gold. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets darker before it gets better. That first day, 4 more people made it to the bakery. Tyler, my night shift mixer, arrived around noon with his teenage son, Connor, both of them covered in blood that wasn't theirs. Jake and Dimitri, 2 of my delivery drivers, fought their way through what was already becoming a horde outside the chain-link fence that surrounded the industrial complex. I pulled each of them inside through the employee entrance, and every time I opened that door the smell hit me. Gunpowder, burning rubber, and something else. Something copper and wrong and too organic. "We seal it," I announced, once I'd gotten everyone into the production floor's break area. Every entrance, every window, every vent big enough for something to crawl through. "We make this place airtight." Connor, who couldn't have been more than 17, stared at me with hollow eyes. "My mom was at the grocery store. She told us to run. She told us to just run and not look back." I wanted to tell him she'd be fine. I wanted to offer hope. But through those windows I could see a woman in a grocery store uniform tearing chunks of flesh from a mailman's neck, and lies wouldn't help any of us survive. "We fortify," I repeated, my voice harder than I intended. "We survive. Then we figure out what comes next." The bakery occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district, 12,000 square feet of production space, with 20-foot ceilings and concrete walls 8 inches thick. The previous owner had used it as a cold storage facility, which meant the insulation was serious, and the structural integrity was military grade. I'd purchased it 5 years earlier when my wholesale business exploded, needing the space to fulfill contracts with 40 restaurants across 3 counties. Those restaurants were probably serving a very different kind of meat now. We spent the remaining daylight hours reinforcing. Tyler and I used the delivery pallets to barricade the loading bay door, stacking them 8 feet high and securing them with cargo straps bolted into the concrete floor. Jake welded steel sheeting across the ground floor windows, using my maintenance torch. Dmitri, who'd worked construction before driving for me, helped me bolt additional deadbolts onto every door, each one scavenged from the supply closet or torn off interior offices we didn't need. Connor worked silently, following instructions without question, moving like someone who'd checked out mentally but whose body kept functioning on autopilot. I recognized that look. It was the same expression I'd seen on Marcus's face during those first moments after he crashed through the door. By nightfall, we had a fortress. Crude, improvised, but solid. The infected pressed against the fence line, drawn by our noise and activity. I counted 47 of them in the security camera feeds before I stopped counting. They moved in clusters, responding to sounds and movement with pack intelligence that made my skin crawl. These weren't mindless movie zombies. They hunted, they adapted, they learned. "Water?" Jake asked, his face streaked with metal filings and sweat. "Well, system," I confirmed, pointing toward the utility room. "Independent of city supply. We can drink, wash, and use it for production indefinitely, as long as the pumps work and the filtration holds." "Food?" Dmitri pressed, his Russian accent thickening with exhaustion. I looked across the production floor, at the massive Hobart mixers, the deck ovens that could bake 200 loaves simultaneously, the walk-in coolers stocked with butter and eggs that would spoil within weeks, at the storage silos holding enough flour to feed an army. "We have bread," I said slowly, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "We have enough ingredients to make bread for months, maybe longer if we're smart about rationing." Tyler caught my eye, and I saw the calculation happening behind his exhausted expression. He'd worked the night shift for 3 years, knew the production capacity better than anyone except me. "The restaurants," he said quietly. "All those contracts. All that flour you ordered last month for the holiday rush? 16,000 pounds, I confirmed. Plus another 2,000 in various specialty flours. 8 months of full production capacity. Maybe 12 if we reduce output to survival rations. The implications settled over us like a weight. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were resource holders. We had the one thing that would matter most in the coming months, the ability to produce calories consistently and in quantity. That first night, none of us slept. We took shifts watching the security feeds, monitoring the infected that pressed against our perimeter fence, counting their numbers as they swelled from dozens to hundreds. The city burned beyond our walls. Gunshots cracked through the darkness at irregular intervals, each volley shorter and more desperate than the last. Helicopters passed overhead twice, their searchlights sweeping across the industrial district, before moving on toward the downtown core, where the situation was clearly even worse. I stood at the production floor entrance staring at my ovens, cold and dark and waiting. In the cooler, the eggs would start deteriorating. The butter would last longer but not indefinitely. The yeast cultures I maintained needed feeding and care. The flour would stay viable for months if kept dry and pest-free, but eventually, every ingredient would run out. "We should start baking," Connor said from behind me, startling me from my calculations. My mom she always said that when things got bad, you should do what you know how to do. You should keep working. The kid was right, sitting in the dark, counting resources, waiting for rescue that might never come. That was a path toward hopelessness and paralysis. But baking, production, creating something valuable, that was purpose. And purpose might be the only thing that kept us human while the world outside turned monstrous. "Morning shift starts at 4 a.m., I told him, checking my watch and finding it was already past 2. "We'll fire up ovens 1 through 4. Basic sourdough recipe, flour, water, salt, and the starter culture I've been maintaining for 6 years. Nothing fancy, just solid, nutritious bread that will keep people alive. Who are we baking for? Connor asked, his voice small and lost. Everyone's dead. Everyone's, not everyone, I interrupted, gesturing toward the security feeds. In the distance, beyond the infected pressing at our fence, I could see lights in some of the buildings, flashlights moving behind windows. Somewhere out there, other people had fortified, had survived, had made it through that first horrific day. There are survivors, and survivors need food, which means we bake. The ovens took 40 minutes to reach optimal temperature. While they heated, I walked Tyler and Connor through the basic sourdough process, mixing the dough, bulk fermentation, shaping, proofing, scoring. My hands moved through the familiar motions while my mind raced with calculations. 400 loaves per day at reduced production, maybe 600 if we pushed and ran additional oven shifts. Each loaf represented roughly 1,200 calories, enough to keep an adult alive for half a day on survival rations. Marcus joined us around 3:30, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 24 hours. "Radio's going crazy," he reported, holding up a battery-powered receiver we'd found in the maintenance office. "Military's establishing safe zones in the northern districts. FEMA's mobilizing. But the infection spread faster than anyone anticipated. They're saying 40% of the metropolitan area is compromised." 40%. I did the math automatically. The metro area held 3 million people. That meant 1.2 million infected, growing by the hour as the sick turned and attacked the healthy in an exponential nightmare. "Are they coming here?" Jake asked from his position monitoring the security feeds. "Military? Rescue?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "They're advising people to shelter in place, secure their locations, wait for evacuation orders that they can't promise will come." The first batch of dough finished its bulk fermentation at 4:45 a.m., exactly on schedule. Muscle memory took over as I divided and shaped the loaves, my hands working with practiced efficiency, while around me the old world died and something new struggled to be born. Connor watched intently, learning the techniques I'd spent 15 years perfecting. Tyler managed the proofing baskets, arranging them in neat rows that would feed into the ovens in coordinated batches. At 5:30 a.m., I loaded the first loaves into oven number 1. The burst of steam, the familiar weight of the peel, the way the dough settled onto the deck stone. It was so achingly normal that for 3 seconds I forgot about the infected outside, the burning city, the collapsed civilization. Then Dmitri shouted from the security station, and reality crashed back. "We've got survivors at the fence," he called out, his voice tight with tension. 8 of them, maybe 9. Infected are converging on their position. I abandoned the ovens, trusting the timers, trusting the process, and sprinted to the security monitors. On screen, I could see them, a group of people, mostly adult males, but with one kid who couldn't have been more than 12, pressed against our chain-link perimeter. Behind them, a wave of infected surged forward, drawn by their panicked movements and desperate shouting. "We can't open the gate," Jake said flatly, his hand already on the intercom controls. "We open that gate, the infected flood in, and we lose everything." He was right. Opening the main gate meant compromising our security, potentially sacrificing everything we'd built in the past 24 hours. But those were people out there, living, breathing people who would be torn apart in the next 60 seconds if we did nothing. I looked back at my ovens, at the bread baking inside them, at the resources that could feed hundreds of survivors if protected. Then I looked at the screen again, at the desperate faces pressed against our fence, at the infected closing the distance with horrifying speed. "The roof access," I said suddenly, my mind racing through the building's layout. "We've got an exterior fire escape that leads to the roof. If we can get them up there, they'll never make it around the building in time," Tyler protested, already moving toward the equipment storage. The infected will cut them off before they reach the fire escape. Not if we distract them, Connor said quietly, his young face set with determination that was terrible to see in someone so young. Not if we make enough noise on the other side of the building to draw them away. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It could compromise everything. But the alternative was watching 9 people die while bread baked in my ovens, and I wasn't ready to cross that line. Not yet. Not on day 2 of the apocalypse, when I still remembered what it meant to be human. Get to the roof access, I ordered Dimitri. Prepare to bring them inside from above. Tyler, Connor, you're with me. We're going to make some noise. The loading bay's small personnel door opened onto the east side of the building, away from the main gate where the survivors were trapped. I armed myself with a metal pipe from the maintenance closet, crude but solid enough to crack skulls if necessary. Tyler carried a fire extinguisher, and Connor gripped a pry bar with white-knuckled intensity. We make noise, we draw them away from the gate. Then we retreat back inside before they reach us, I explained, my voice steadier than I felt. 30 seconds of distraction. That's all those people need to reach the fire escape. We do this smart, we do this fast, and nobody dies. Understood? They nodded, and I pulled open the door. The stench hit first, rot and waste and something chemical that burned my nostrils. Then the sound. That collective moan of hundreds of infected throats producing noise that wasn't quite human anymore. I stepped into the gray morning light, raised the metal pipe, and brought it down against the building's corrugated siding with all my strength. The sound rang out like a bell, sharp and metallic and impossible to ignore. I struck again and again, establishing a rhythm that echoed across the industrial complex. Tyler joined in, banging his fire extinguisher against a dumpster. Connor added his own percussion, the pry bar striking concrete in steady attention-grabbing beats, and the infected responded, their heads swiveled toward us with predatory precision. The wave that had been converging on the survivors split, with at least half the horde turning and surging toward our position instead. "Keep going," I shouted, even as my lizard brain screamed at me to run. 15 more seconds through the chaos. I heard Dimitri's voice crackling over Marcus's radio, which I'd clipped to my belt. They're at the fire escape. Climbing now. Keep those things busy. The infected were close enough now that I could see individual details. A male in a business suit with half his face torn away, an elderly man still wearing a security guard uniform, a teenager whose high school letterman jacket was soaked in blood. They moved with horrible purpose, their eyes fixed on us with hunger that transcended normal human appetite. "Now," I barked, and we retreated inside, slamming the personnel door and engaging every lock and bolt. The infected hit the door 3 seconds later, and the metal shuddered under their collective weight. The locks held, but barely, and I made a mental note to reinforce this entrance as soon as we had time. Back at the security station, I watched the feeds showing our roof access. Dimitri was hauling the last survivor, the kid I'd seen earlier, through the maintenance hatch. They'd made it. 9 more survivors, which meant 9 more mouths to feed but also 9 more hands for work. 9 more people to share the burden of survival. The timer chimed from the production floor. First batch of bread was ready. I pulled the loaves from the oven, their crusts perfectly golden brown, their internal temperature exactly where it needed to be. The smell of fresh-baked bread filled the bakery, so incongruous with the horror outside that it felt like a hallucination. But the loaves were real, solid and warm in my hands, proof that some things endured even when civilization collapsed. Connor appeared at my shoulder, staring at the bread with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How long can we keep doing this?" he asked quietly. "How long before the flour runs out?" I set down the loaves, did the math in my head again. 16,000 pounds of flour, consumption rate based on daily production, accounting for new survivors who would need feeding. 8 months at current usage, I told him honestly. Maybe 10 if we ration carefully and reduce production. Maybe 12 if we get really desperate and cut rations to starvation levels. And then what? Then we either find more ingredients, I said, looking out at the infected horde surrounding our fortress, at the burning city beyond, at the collapsing world that had no answers left, or we figure out how to survive without baking. But that's a problem for future Derek. Today, today we bake bread, we feed survivors, and we make it to tomorrow. The 9 survivors Dmitri brought down from the roof were in rough shape. The kid, his name was Oliver and he was 13, not 12, had a gash across his forearm that needed cleaning and bandaging. An older gentleman named Carl had twisted his ankle during the climb. The others were physically intact, but psychologically shattered, that same hollow-eyed look that seemed to be the universal expression of people who'd watched their world end in real time. I gathered everyone in the break area, my original 5 plus the 9 newcomers, and laid out the situation with brutal honesty. This is a bakery, I started, my voice echoing in the converted warehouse space. We have flour, water, salt, and commercial baking equipment. We have power from the generators, water from our independent well system, and defensive fortifications that will hold as long as we're smart and careful. What we don't have is unlimited food variety. We can bake bread, lots of bread. But bread alone isn't a complete diet, and our supplementary ingredients, butter, eggs, anything that requires refrigeration, will run out within weeks. Carl, the older survivor with the twisted ankle, raised his hand like we were in a classroom. What about rescue? Government response? Radio reports suggest the military is overwhelmed, Marcus answered, holding up the portable receiver. They're establishing safe zones, but the infection spread too fast. They're advising shelter in place until they can organize evacuation protocols. Which could be weeks, I added, watching their faces fall as hope drained away. Or months. Or never. We plan for self-sufficiency, and if rescue comes, we treat it as a bonus. One of the new survivors, a lean man with sharp features who introduced himself as Vincent, spoke up. You're saying we're on our own, that this place becomes our entire world. For now, I confirmed. But it's not just about survival. We have production capacity. We can bake bread for ourselves and for other survivors. We can establish trade networks, create value, build something beyond just hiding and waiting to die. Vincent's expression shifted from despair to calculation. Trade bread for what? Money's worthless now. Security, information, supplies we can't produce here, manpower for fortification. I was thinking out loud now, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. Bread becomes currency. We become producers in whatever economy emerges from this collapse. We're not just survivors, we're essential infrastructure. Tyler caught my vision, his exhausted face lighting up with the first spark of hope I'd seen since Marcus crashed through that door 26 hours ago. The other industrial buildings. There's a medical supply warehouse 3 blocks north, that machine shop to the east, the water treatment facility near the freeway. If any of them fortified and survived, then they have things we need, and we have something everyone needs, I finished. Nobody can survive on bread alone long term, but nobody survives at all without calories. We bake, we trade, we build networks, we create reasons for people to keep us alive and supplied. It was a framework, a purpose, a reason to keep going beyond simple survival. I watched the idea take root in the expressions around me, saw spines straighten and eyes refocus. Humans need purpose to function, need to believe there's a point to continued existence. I'd just given them that purpose. First priority is securing this facility completely, I continued, switching into planning mode. Every entrance fortified, every weakness identified and reinforced. Second priority is establishing contact with other survivors. We need to know who's out there, what they have, what they need. Third priority is maximizing our production efficiency while conserving resources for the long term. I can help with fortifications, Vincent offered. and something in his tone suggested he had relevant experience. Did 3 tours overseas, force protection and defensive positions. Construction background, Dmitri added, raising his hand. I can reinforce structural weak points. Carl shifted his injured ankle gingerly. Retired accountant. I can manage inventory, track consumption rates, project resource longevity. Around the circle, people began volunteering skills, finding ways to contribute, stepping into roles that gave them value beyond just being mouths to feed. It was tribal instinct kicking in, the human need to be useful to the group, to justify one's place in the collective survival effort. Connor sat silently through the planning session, his young face tight with an expression that aged him decades. When everyone else had volunteered their skills, he finally spoke. I want to learn to bake, he said quietly, looking directly at me. If bread is what keeps us alive, I want to know how to make it. If something happens to you, someone else needs to know. The kid understood something most of the adults were still processing. That knowledge was as valuable as resources, that skills could outlast supplies, that in this new world, competence meant survival. You start training tomorrow, I told him, meaning it as both promise and responsibility. 4 a.m., when the ovens heat up. The second day passed in a blur of activity. Vincent and Dmitri worked on reinforcing the perimeter fence, adding secondary barriers made from metal sheeting scavenged from a collapsed warehouse across the street. Jake welded additional security bars across the ground floor windows. Tyler and I ran continuous baking operations, producing 400 loaves before exhaustion forced us to stop. Carl set up an inventory management system in one of the empty offices, cataloging every pound of flour, every container of yeast, every resource we possessed. His projections were both encouraging and terrifying. We had enough basic ingredients for 8 months at current production, but supplementary supplies would run out much faster. Butter would last 3 weeks. Eggs, maybe 4. After that, we'd be producing the most basic bread possible: flour, water, salt, and thyme. As sunset approached, Marcus made contact with our first external survivor group. Got a response on the CB radio, he announced, his voice crackling with excitement. There's a fortified position at the community center 8 blocks north. They're calling themselves the Riverside Holdout. 23 survivors, including 4 children. They've got medical supplies from a raided pharmacy and some canned goods, but they're running low on calories. I felt my pulse quicken. First contact, first potential trade partner, first step toward building something larger than just our isolated fortress. Tell them we have bread, I instructed. Fresh-baked, high-quality bread. We're interested in trading for medical supplies, fresh water purification tablets, and any information about other survivor groups in the area. Marcus relayed the message, then listened intently to the response. They want to know our location and production capacity. They're asking if we can supply ongoing rations. Tell them we can discuss terms tomorrow. Daytime meeting, neutral ground between our positions, 2 representatives from each side. I was improvising, making up the rules of post-apocalyptic trade negotiations as I went along, but it felt right. Cautious, but open to cooperation. Strong, but willing to deal. That night, we ate bread for dinner. Just bread, no butter, no spreads, saving those precious supplies for future desperation. The bread was good, though, because I'd spent 15 years perfecting my craft, and apocalypse or not, my standards held. The sourdough had a perfect crust-to-crumb ratio, with that distinctive tang that came from my carefully maintained starter culture. Tomorrow we meet with Riverside, I announced to the group as we ate. If negotiations go well, we establish our first trade partnership. If they go poorly, we learn what not to do for the next attempt. Either way, we're moving forward. We're building something. Connor volunteered for first watch that night, insisting he wouldn't sleep anyway. I found him later, standing at the security station, staring at the monitors showing the infected that surrounded our perimeter. There were fewer now, maybe 100 instead of the earlier hundreds, but they were persistent, drawn by the lights and sounds of human activity inside. My mom would have liked this place, he said without looking at me. She was always talking about bread, about how making food brought people together, about how feeding others was the most human thing you could do. I didn't ask if his mom was alive. The hollow way he spoke of her made the answer clear. She was right, I told him instead. Feeding people matters. It mattered before, and it matters even more now. What we're doing here, it's not just survival. It's maintaining something good in a world that's forgotten what good looks like. He nodded slowly, and we stood together in silence, watching the infected and the burning city beyond, two bakers planning tomorrow's production schedule while civilization died outside. Day 3 began with Connor shaking me awake at 3:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my alarm. "I'm ready to learn," he said simply, and I dragged myself from the makeshift sleeping area we'd set up in the empty office space. The ovens were still warm from the previous day's continuous use. I walked him through the process step by step, checking temperatures, preparing the work surfaces, pulling the starter culture from the walk-in cooler where it bubbled quietly in its container, alive and hungry and older than the apocalypse itself. "Bread is alchemy," I told him as we mixed the first batch of dough: flour, water, salt, and time. 4 ingredients transformed through patient craft into something that sustains life. People have been doing this for 10,000 years, through every crisis and catastrophe and collapse. We're continuing that tradition. His hands were clumsy at first, overworking the dough, but he learned quickly, asking sharp questions and listening intently to the answers. By the time the sun rose, we had 200 loaves in various stages of production, and Connor could handle basic mixing without supervision. Tyler joined us at 6 a.m., looking marginally more human after 6 hours of sleep. Marcus made contact with 2 more groups overnight, he reported, snagging a piece of still warm bread from the cooling rack. "There's a fortified apartment complex 9 blocks southwest. They're calling themselves the Tower, and someone claiming to be from the old fire station about a mile east, both interested in trading for food." Our meeting with Riverside Holdout was scheduled for 10 a.m. at a vacant lot between our positions. I selected Tyler to accompany me. He was calm under pressure and good at reading people, skills that would matter more than physical strength in negotiations. We armed ourselves with metal pipes, more for show than actual combat utility, and packed 20 loaves of bread in canvas bags. "You've got 4 hours of production time," I told Connor before we left. "Don't open any exterior doors. Don't respond to anyone approaching the perimeter. If something goes wrong, barricade yourselves in the cold storage room and wait for us to return." He nodded seriously, already covered in flour dust, looking both too young for this responsibility and somehow exactly old enough. The vacant lot between our positions had been a construction site before the outbreak, skeletal steel framework reaching toward an indifferent sky, surrounded by equipment that would never finish whatever building had been planned. Now it served as neutral ground, exposed enough that both parties could approach safely while maintaining sightlines back to our respective fortresses. Tyler and I arrived first, taking position near a cement mixer that provided partial cover. The infected in this area were sparse, maybe a dozen visible within the immediate blocks, drawn away by louder activity elsewhere in the dying city. The ones we could see moved with that distinctive jerking gait, their attention fixed on sounds and movements we couldn't perceive, hunting according to instincts we didn't fully understand yet. "Northeast approach," Tyler murmured, his grip tightening on his metal pipe. 2 figures, moving carefully. The Riverside representatives emerged from behind a burned-out delivery truck, and I felt tension I hadn't realized I was carrying ease slightly. They were clearly human, moving with deliberate caution rather than predatory hunger, armed with crowbars but holding them in a way that suggested defense rather than aggression. Both were adult males, one older with gray threading through his beard, The younger, maybe mid-30s, with the lean, alert build of someone who'd been athletic before the world ended. Derek Peterson, I called out, keeping my voice low enough not to attract infected attention, but loud enough to carry across the 20 feet separating us. Peterson's Wholesale Bakery. You're from Riverside? Nathan Grant, the older one, responded, his eyes scanning our position, the bags we carried, the weapons we held. This is Aaron. We represent 23 survivors currently secured at the community center. You mentioned bread. I pulled a loaf from the canvas bag, held it up so they could see. Even from this distance, the quality was obvious. The golden brown crust, the artisan's scoring, the weight that promised substantial nutrition. Sourdough, professional grade. We have production capacity for 400 loaves daily, potentially more if we expand operations. Aaron's eyes widened slightly, and I knew we'd just shifted the entire negotiation dynamic. 400 loaves meant we weren't just survivors with a lucky food stash. We were producers, manufacturers, a functional economic unit in whatever trade system would emerge from the collapse. What's your ask? Nathan said carefully, his negotiator's instincts clearly sharp despite the apocalypse. What do you need in exchange? Medical supplies, I replied immediately. Antibiotics, bandages, antiseptics, pain medication, water purification tablets, information about other survivor groups, their locations, their capabilities, their needs. Long term, we'll need ingredients we can't produce ourselves: sugar, honey, any preserved proteins, vitamins to supplement a bread-heavy diet. Nathan and Aaron exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. We have medical supplies from 2 rated pharmacies, Nathan confirmed. Substantial quantities. We also have a former Army medic in our group who knows how to use them properly. But 23 people consume resources fast. We need consistent calories, not just a one-time trade. This was the moment, the decision point that would define whether we became isolated survivors or the foundation of something larger. I could play it safe, negotiate small exchanges, maintain maximum control and minimum risk. Or I could take the leap, commit to ongoing partnership, build the network that might actually survive long-term. Ongoing supply agreement, I proposed, watching Nathan's face carefully for reactions. We provide 20 loaves daily to Riverside. That's 24,000 calories, enough to supplement whatever other food you have. In exchange, you provide medical coverage. If anyone in our group gets sick or injured, your medic treats them. You share intelligence about infected movement patterns, other survivor groups, and potential resource locations. And you provide security support if our position comes under serious threat. You're proposing an alliance, Aaron said slowly, not just a trade arrangement. I'm proposing survival, I corrected. Isolated groups get picked off. Networks endure. You need calories. We need medical expertise and security depth. Together, we're stronger than separate. Nathan pulled a loaf from his own supplies. Crackers, I noticed, probably from someone's emergency stash, breaking down into crumbs even as he handled them. The contrast with our professional bread was stark. We accept your terms, he said after a long moment of consideration. 20 loaves daily, starting tomorrow. We'll send Aaron as our liaison. He can coordinate deliveries and information exchange. But we need to establish security protocols for the transfers. The infected have been gathering in larger groups, showing pack behavior we didn't expect. We spent the next 20 minutes working out logistics, delivery times, midpoint locations for exchanges, signal systems for emergencies, protocols if either position became compromised. Tyler took notes on a water-damaged notebook we'd brought, his neat handwriting recording the framework of our first alliance. One more thing, Nathan added as we prepared to separate. There's a group fortified in the water treatment facility about 2 miles northeast of here. They call themselves Clearwater Station. They've got 40-plus survivors in control of the municipal water supply for this entire district. You want a powerful ally, they're it. But they're picky about who they trade with. They've turned away 3 groups already. Why? Tyler asked, his tactical mind clearly processing threat assessments. They have something everyone needs, Aaron explained. Clean water is the ultimate leverage. They can afford to be selective, to only partner with groups that offer real value. You show up with bread, with production capacity and professional quality, they might actually listen. We parted ways with our canvas bags lighter. We'd left 15 loaves with Riverside as a good faith demonstration, and our strategic position substantially stronger. First alliance secured. Intelligence on additional survivor groups obtained. Framework established for the trade network I'd envisioned. Tyler and I made it back to the bakery without incident, though we spotted infected clusters that were larger and more organized than I liked. The infection was evolving, or the surviving infected were learning, or both. Either way, it meant our fortifications would need constant upgrading. Connor met us at the entrance, flour-covered and exhausted but with pride lighting his young face. 300 loaves, he announced. Maintained production schedule exactly like you taught me. No incidents. I gripped his shoulder, feeling flour transfer to my hand. You did good, kid. Real good. The next week established our rhythm. Connor and I handled primary production, running 2 full baking shifts that produced between 400 and 500 loaves daily. Tyler managed inventory and started training Jake on basic baking techniques, expanding our skilled labor pool. Dimitri and Vincent completed perimeter fortifications, creating layered defenses that could slow or stop infected incursions. Marcus maintained radio communications, building our intelligence network as more survivor groups emerged and made contact. Carl's inventory projections became our Bible. Detailed spreadsheets tracking every ingredient, projecting consumption rates, identifying crisis points before they became critical. According to his calculations, we'd burn through our butter supply in 11 days. Eggs would last 19 more days. Sugar had maybe 3 weeks, but the flour, precious, essential flour, would sustain us for 8.3 months at current usage rates. We need to reduce supplementary ingredients in the base recipe, I told the group during our evening meeting on day 9. Starting tomorrow, we transition to the most basic possible bread flour, water, salt, and starter culture. Nothing else. It'll be blander, less nutritious without the fats from butter, but it'll extend our production timeline by eliminating dependencies on ingredients we can't replace. Oliver, the 13-year-old we'd rescued from the fence on day 2, raised his hand hesitantly. What about vitamin deficiencies? My health teacher said you need balanced nutrition, or you get sick. Smart kid. You're right, I acknowledged. Bread alone will keep you alive short-term, but cause problems long-term. That's why we're trading for supplementary foods, proteins, fats, vitamins. Nobody lives on just bread. But bread keeps you alive while you hunt for everything else. Our alliance with Riverside Holdout proved its value on day 11 when a massive infected horde, over 300 strong, swept through the industrial district. Marcus picked up their warning call on the radio minutes before the wave hit, giving us just enough time to kill all exterior lights, shut down anything making noise, and retreat to our interior fortifications. We watched on security feeds as the horde flowed past our position, drawn toward louder activity somewhere to the south. They moved with terrifying coordination, responding to some signal or instinct we couldn't detect, hunting as a unified organism rather than individual infected. The attack lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of holding our breath and praying our defenses held, of watching hundreds of infected press against our fence while we remained absolutely silent inside. When they finally moved on, drawn by whatever distant stimulus had attracted them, we found our fence damaged but intact. Vincent's reinforcements had held, but the close call drove home how fragile our security really was. We need early warning systems, Vincent announced during the emergency meeting after the horde passed. Observation posts on rooftops with radio communication. Coordinated watch schedules with our allied groups. If Riverside hadn't warned us, we'd have been caught with the ovens running and lights blazing. We'd have drawn that entire horde directly onto our position. He's right, Nathan confirmed when he arrived for the next day's bread exchange, accompanied this time by their medic, a quiet man named Samuel who carried himself with military precision. Isolated groups are blind. Connected groups survive. We need to formalize this network, establish communication protocols, create a genuine alliance structure. You're watching the birth of post-apocalyptic civilization right here. If this is hitting different, drop a comment below about what you'd trade for in this world, and share this with someone who loves survival stories. Trust me, you'll want them to see what happens next. Over the next 3 weeks, our network expanded from 2 groups to 7. The tower, that fortified apartment complex southwest of our position, joined after their leader, a former corporate executive named Michelle, recognized that calories were the foundation of every other survival priority. The fire station group, led by former firefighter Thomas, brought tactical expertise and working vehicles they'd managed to secure. Clearwater Station, that critical water treatment facility Nathan had mentioned, finally agreed to trade after I personally delivered 50 loaves and spent 2 hours discussing production capacity with their leader, an engineer named Patricia who asked more technical questions about our operations than anyone else I'd encountered. Each alliance followed the same pattern. Initial cautious contact, demonstration of our production capacity, negotiation of exchange terms, establishment of delivery and communication protocols. Each group brought different resources to the network. Medical supplies from Riverside, tactical vehicles from the fire station, clean water from Clearwater, tool fabrication from a machine shop group that called themselves the Forge, preserved foods from a group that had secured a restaurant supply warehouse. Bread became currency. 20 loaves bought medical attention. 50 loaves secured a tank of diesel fuel for our generators. 100 loaves convinced the Forge to fabricate custom security improvements for our facility. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were economic infrastructure, the productive foundation that other groups relied upon. By day 30, we were baking 700 loaves daily, pushing our equipment and personnel to their limits. Connor had become genuinely skilled, capable of running entire production shifts without supervision. Jake and Tyler handled intermediate steps, mixing, shaping, scoring. I focused on quality control and the starter culture maintenance that kept our entire operation viable. Carl's projections grew increasingly grim. At current production rates, flour supply drops below critical threshold in 6.1 months, he reported during our weekly resource meeting. That's assuming no interruptions, no spoilage, no emergency demands. If we maintain this consumption rate, we face complete supply exhaustion around day 240. 240 days, just short of 8 months. The timeline felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Long enough to build something meaningful, short enough that the ending was already visible on the horizon. We need to find more flour. I stated the obvious, knowing it was anything but simple. Commercial sources, restaurant supply warehouses, other bakeries, anywhere that stored bulk ingredients. Thomas from the fire station leaned forward, his weathered face serious. There's a restaurant supply warehouse about 8 miles west, near the freeway interchange. We scouted it 2 weeks ago but didn't enter. Too many infected in the area, and we didn't have a reason to risk it. But if it's intact, it could have tons of bulk ingredients. 8 miles through infested territory. High-risk operation requiring vehicles, armed personnel, careful planning, but potentially thousands of pounds of flour, enough to extend our production timeline by months or even years. We plan it carefully, I decided, looking around the room at representatives from our allied groups. Combined operation. Fire Station provides vehicles and tactical expertise. Forge provides tools for breaking into secured storage. We bring knowledge of what ingredients matter and how to identify quality versus spoiled product. We do this smart. We could extend our production capacity substantially. And if we don't, Michelle from the tower asked, her executive's mind clearly running risk-benefit calculations. Then we face the timeline Carl projected. Production winds down around month 8. After that, I didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implications. Planning the supply run consumed a full week. Thomas and his people mapped routes, identified choke points, analyzed infected movement patterns. Vincent planned security protocols and fallback positions. I created detailed lists of target ingredients, explaining how to identify spoilage and estimate quality. We assembled a team of 12 people, 4 from the fire station, 3 from the forge, 2 from Riverside, and 3 from the bakery, including myself. Connor lobbied hard to come along, but I refused, needing him to maintain production during our absence. You're the only other person who can run the full baking operation, I told him the night before we departed. If something happens to me out there, you become the baker. That's not a backup role. That's critical infrastructure. Stay here. Keep baking. Keep everyone fed. He understood, though the disappointment was clear in his young face. 28 days into the apocalypse, and he'd already learned that duty sometimes meant accepting the role you were needed for, rather than the adventure you wanted. We departed at dawn on day 38, riding in 2 vehicles, a fire truck from Thomas's group and a reinforced pickup from the forge. The streets between our position and the warehouse were a maze of abandoned cars, debris, and roaming infected. We moved slowly, avoiding main roads where possible, taking circuitous routes through industrial areas where infected presence was lighter. The restaurant supply warehouse sat in a vast parking lot surrounded by chain-link fence, its loading docks sealed with rolling gates, its windows intact and unbroken. From our observation position 300 yards away, it looked almost untouched. No signs of looting, no obvious damage, no indication that other survivors had discovered this resource cache. Too quiet, Vincent muttered, scanning the area through binoculars. Place this intact should have attracted scavengers. Why hasn't anyone hit it? Thomas pointed toward the warehouse's far side, where shadows moved with distinctive jerking motion. Infected nest. Look at the density. I count 40, maybe 50, just in the visible area. There could be hundreds inside the building itself. My stomach sank. The supplies we needed were right there, visible through the fence, but guarded by a concentration of infected that made direct approach suicide. We could try to draw them away with noise and distraction, but that many infected would take hours to disperse, and making that much noise would attract every other infected within miles. We need a different approach, I said slowly, my mind racing through options. What if we don't draw them away? What if we trap them instead? The plan took 3 hours to execute. Using materials from the forge's truck, we constructed a funnel system, metal sheeting and chain-link panels arranged to guide infected movement into a specific direction. Thomas's team created a noise distraction on the warehouse's north side, drawing the infected horde toward the sound. Once they committed to that direction, we sealed the funnel behind them, trapping the entire group in a cordoned area away from the loading docks we needed to access. It wasn't perfect. Some infected remained scattered around the perimeter, but it cleared enough space for our team to approach the loading docks. The Forge's people cut through the security gates with professional efficiency, and we entered the warehouse with weapons ready and nerves stretched tight. The interior was a cathedral of survival. Floor-to-ceiling shelving stretched into shadowed distances, packed with commercial-grade ingredients in bulk quantities. 50-pound bags of flour stacked on pallets, industrial containers of salt, sugar, yeast, preserved goods designed to supply restaurants through the apocalypse that had killed all their customers. We hit the jackpot, breathed Samuel, Riverside's medic, his voice echoing in the vast space. We worked with desperate efficiency, loading our vehicles with as much flour as they could carry. 50-pound bags stacked and secured, the truck's suspension groaning under weight they weren't designed to handle. We took salt, yeast, even some sugar, though I knew we'd burn through it quickly. Every trip between the warehouse and the vehicles was exposed, vulnerable, the trapped infected howling their frustration from inside their metal funnel prison. 2 more loads and we're at capacity, Thomas called out, checking the vehicle's weight distribution. Any more and we risk breaking down on the return trip. I wanted to stay longer, to grab everything, to strip this place clean. But he was right. Overloading meant potentially losing everything if our vehicles failed in infected territory. Better to return successfully with less than to fail catastrophically trying to carry more. We departed as the sun reached its zenith, both vehicles loaded to capacity, the trapped infected still howling behind us. The return journey took 4 hours, moving slowly under the weight, taking careful routes, stopping 3 times to clear obstacles from our path. But we made it, rolling back into the bakery's compound as sunset painted the sky in shades that matched the burning city. Connor met us at the loading dock, and I saw tears tracking through the flour dust on his face when he realized we'd made it back alive. "Thought you weren't coming back," he admitted quietly, helping us unload. "Thought I was going to be the baker now." "Not yet, kid," I told him, gripping his shoulder with a flour-dusted hand. "I've got at least 6 more months of teaching you everything I know." Carl ran the numbers that evening, his weathered face transforming with something close to joy as he updated his spreadsheets. 2,200 pounds of flour, he announced to the gathered group, plus 800 pounds of supplementary ingredients. This extends our production timeline by 3.4 months. We're now viable through month 11, possibly month 12 if we maintain strict rationing. A year. We just bought ourselves a year of consistent production, a year of remaining essential infrastructure, a year of being valuable enough that other groups would protect us for access to our bread. But even as we celebrated, I caught Carl's eye and saw the question he wasn't asking aloud. What happens at month 12? What happens when even this windfall runs out and we face the timeline's end? The weeks that followed established a strange new normal. Production ran like clockwork. Connor and I maintained primary operations while Jake and Tyler handled supplementary shifts. Our network expanded to 11 allied groups, covering a territory of maybe 40 square blocks, establishing what amounted to a post-apocalyptic city-state built around bread production and mutual survival. Vincent organized a security council that coordinated defense across all allied positions. Thomas's vehicles ran patrol routes, providing early warning of infected hordes and helping groups evacuate when positions became compromised. Patricia from Clearwater Station established water distribution networks that ensured all allied groups had access to clean supplies. Michelle from the tower created what she called a resource exchange board, a system for tracking who needed what and who could provide it, optimizing trades across the entire network. Bread remained the foundation of everything. Every other exchange ultimately traced back to calories, the most basic, essential requirement. We baked, and that baking sustained not just 13 people in a converted warehouse, but over 200 survivors across 11 allied positions. On day 62, a new group made contact. They called themselves Haven, fortified in what had been a private school about a mile southeast of our position. Their leader, James, arrived for negotiations with 15 people in tow. Not a delegation, but what appeared to be his entire group seeking to relocate. "We lost our position," he explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Horde broke through our defenses 3 nights ago. We fought them off, but the building's compromised. We need sanctuary, and we heard your network takes in survivors." I looked at the 15 refugees, 3 children among them, all of them carrying the hollow-eyed look of people who'd lost everything. We had space in the bakery. We had production capacity to feed additional mouths, especially with the flour we'd secured from the supply run. But 15 more people meant 15 more dependencies, 15 more vulnerabilities, 15 more souls whose deaths would be my responsibility if something went wrong. We're not a charity, I said carefully, knowing how brutal it sounded but needing to establish expectations. Everyone contributes. Everyone works. We'll feed you, shelter you, protect you, but you earn your place through labor and skills. What can you offer? James gestured to his people. Teachers who can educate the kids, making sure knowledge survives even if civilization doesn't. Mechanics who can maintain the vehicles and generators that keep us mobile. Farmers who know how to grow food, not just consume it. We have skills. We just need a chance to apply them. Farmers. The word stuck in my mind like a fishhook. You know how to grow crops? Real agriculture? Margaret here, James indicated an older woman with earth-stained hands, ran a commercial farm before the outbreak. Vegetables, grains, sustainable agriculture. She's been saying we need to plan beyond scavenging, start thinking about actually producing food. I looked at Connor, saw my own thoughts reflected in his expression. Flour had a timeline, maybe 12 months now, but still finite. But grain could be grown, harvested, processed into flour, continuing the cycle indefinitely. If we could establish agricultural production while our scavenged supplies lasted, we could potentially extend our timeline forever. You're in, I decided, watching relief transform the refugees' faces. We have space in the secondary warehouse building. It's not comfortable, but it's secure. You start tomorrow. Teachers begin education programs for the kids. Mechanics assess our equipment needs. And Margaret, I turn to the older woman. You start planning for agriculture. We need to know what it takes to grow grain, how long until harvest, what resources are required, because this bread operation has maybe a year before we run out of ingredients. Whatever comes after needs to be ready before that deadline hits. Haven's integration brought our total population to 28 people in the bakery compound, and growing. The space that had felt vast and empty on day one now hummed with activity. Baking operations running continuous shifts. Mechanics maintaining our generators and vehicles. Teachers conducting lessons for the children in a converted office space. Margaret mapping potential agricultural sites on salvaged paper. Vincent and I stood on the roof one evening around day 70, watching the sunset paint the ruined city in colors that were almost beautiful if you could forget what they represented. The infected still prowled the streets below, but their numbers had diminished as starvation and attrition took their toll. The ones that remained were the strongest, the fastest, the most dangerous. Evolutionary pressure selecting for the deadliest variants. We built something, Vincent said quietly, his military bearing softened by exhaustion. Came to this place thinking we'd hide until rescue arrived. Instead, we created a whole new society. Society built on bread and borrowed time, I countered, taking a bite from the loaf I'd brought up with me. Plain sourdough, no butter or supplements, just flour and water and salt, and the starter culture I maintained with religious devotion. We've got maybe 10 months before the flour runs out. After that, we're dependent on Margaret's agricultural plans working perfectly. No margin for error, no backup supplies, no safety net. Then we make it work. Vincent replied with the certainty of someone who'd survived 3 combat tours overseas. We've made everything else work so far. We'll figure this out too. I wanted to share his confidence. But I knew bread, knew grain, knew agriculture in ways he didn't. Growing wheat at scale required land, water, fertilizer, time, knowledge, and luck. We had some of those elements. Others remained desperately uncertain, and the timeline was already counting down. On day 81, Margaret presented her agricultural plan to the assembled leadership of our allied groups. She'd mapped every piece of arable land within our network's territory, identified water sources, calculated growing seasons and expected yields. The numbers were simultaneously encouraging and terrifying. If we start planting in the next 3 weeks, we can potentially harvest a crop in 4 to 5 months, she explained, pointing to hand-drawn maps that represented our last chance at long-term survival. But we need security for the growing areas. Infected won't bother crops, but human raiders will. We need tools for tilling and harvesting. We need seeds, and finding quality seed wheat is going to be challenging. And we need perfect conditions, right amount of rain, adequate sun, no unexpected frosts or droughts. Everything has to go right. What's the expected yield if everything does go right? Patricia from Clearwater Station asked, her engineer's mind clearly running calculations. Margaret hesitated before answering. First harvest, maybe 500 pounds of usable grain if we're lucky. Experienced farmers with proper equipment could get more, but we're working with improvised tools and amateur labor. 500 pounds. I did the math instantly. That was about 10 days of production at current output, 10 days of bread from 4 months of agricultural labor. The economics were brutal, the timeline unforgiving, but it's a foundation, Margaret continued, seeming to sense the despair her numbers had generated. First harvest gives us seed for an expanded second crop. Second harvest yields feed us while providing seed for third planting. It's exponential growth, but only if we survive long enough for the cycle to establish. So we need to make our current supplies last until the agricultural operation becomes self-sustaining, Michelle from the tower summarized, her executive mind cutting to the strategic core. How long, realistically? Carl consulted his projections, lips moving silently as he ran calculations. 18 months minimum to establish sustainable agriculture. We have supplies for 12 months. That's a 6-month gap where we'll be rationing final reserves while waiting for crops that might not yield enough to support us. If you're stressed just hearing about these impossible choices, imagine living them. Hit that subscribe button, because the real test is about to begin, and you need to see how we handled the gap between supplies running out and the harvest that might save us all. The meeting broke up with grim determination but no easy answers. We'd built something remarkable, a network of survivors supporting each other through trade and cooperation, a functional post-apocalyptic micro-civilization. But all of it rested on flour supplies that had a definite end date and agricultural plans that might not yield sufficient returns before we starved. That night, I found Connor in the production area, running through his evening cleaning routine with mechanical precision. At 16, because apparently weeks felt like years now, and his birthday had passed unnoticed somewhere around day 60, he'd become genuinely skilled at baking, capable of maintaining operations without my supervision. You heard Margaret's plan? I asked, already knowing the answer from the tightness around his eyes. 500 pounds isn't enough, he said flatly, scrubbing at an already clean work surface. Even I can do that math. We bake through our current supplies hoping the harvest works, but even if it does, it won't produce enough to sustain us. Not in the first cycle, I agreed. But agriculture is patient. You plant, you harvest, you replant. Each cycle yields more than the last. Eventually, it becomes self-sustaining. We just have to survive long enough to reach that point. And if we don't, if the harvest fails or yields less than expected, or gets destroyed by raiders or infected or bad weather, I didn't have a good answer for that. Then we figure something else out. Scavenge more warehouses, find additional resource caches, develop alternative food sources. Humans are adaptable. It's our species' superpower. We'll adapt. He set down his cleaning rag, turning to face me directly. My mom used to say that too. That humans adapt. That we survive. Then she got torn apart by infected while I ran away. Adaptation didn't save her. Luck did. Bad luck for her. Good luck for me that they chose her instead of me. The guilt in his voice was corrosive, eating him from inside. Your mom told you to run because she was adapting, I said quietly. She saw the situation, calculated the options, chose the adaptation that saved her child. That's not luck. That's love making impossible choices under pressure. He nodded slowly, but I could see the words didn't fully reach him. Survivor's guilt doesn't respond to logic or reassurance. It's a weight you carry, growing heavier with each person who doesn't make it while you do. The next morning, we started planting operations. Margaret identified 3 viable sites within our security perimeter, vacant lots where soil quality and sun exposure made agriculture feasible. Thomas's team helped till the soil using improvised plows attached to their vehicles. We traded 50 loaves to a group called the Gardeners, survivalists who'd hoarded seeds, for 2 pounds of seed wheat. Margaret insisted it wasn't nearly enough for optimal planting density, but it would have to do. Watching the planting crews work, seeing grains scattered across prepared soil, felt both hopeful and desperate. Everything, our entire future, riding on whether those tiny seeds would germinate, grow, and yield enough to sustain us. Civilization built on such fragile foundations, dependent on sun and rain and timing and luck. Production continued uninterrupted, 700 loaves daily, feeding over 200 survivors across our network. The routine had become almost meditative, Connor and I moving through familiar steps with practiced efficiency. The smell of baking bread a constant reminder of what we preserved, what we represented. As long as the ovens stayed warm, hope remained alive. Around day 90, we made contact with a group that changed everything. They called themselves the Convoy, mobile survivors in a fleet of armored vehicles, traders who moved between established settlements exchanging goods and information. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, arrived with an offer that seemed too good to be true. "We've been mapping survivor settlements across the entire region," she explained, spreading hand-drawn maps across our conference table. 23 established communities ranging from a dozen survivors to your network here with over 200. Some have medicine, some have fuel, some have preserved food. One settlement controls a hydroelectric dam. They have unlimited power. Another group secured a munitions factory. They have weapons and ammunition. But you're the only group we've found with consistent, large-scale food production. That makes you valuable. That makes you a priority trade partner. I studied the maps, seeing our small territory represented as a single dot in a constellation of survivor groups, scattered across what had been a metropolitan area of 3 million people. We weren't isolated anymore. We were part of a larger network, a regional economy that was emerging from the ruins. "What's your offer?" I asked, knowing that value always came with strings attached. "We connect you with other settlements. We facilitate trades you couldn't negotiate directly. Your bread for their medicine, fuel, tools, whatever you need. We provide intelligence about infected movements, raider groups, and resource opportunities. In exchange, we take a 10% commission on all trades we facilitate." 10% was steep, but not unreasonable for the service she was offering. "You're proposing to make us part of a regional trade network," I summarized. "Transform us from local producers to export manufacturers." "Exactly," Rachel confirmed, her expression sharp with business instinct that had survived the apocalypse intact. "There are settlements 40, 50, even 70 miles from here that need what you produce. They'll pay premium rates, medical supplies, fuel, things you can't get locally. You expand production. We handle logistics and security for the transport. Everyone prospers." It was expansion, opportunity, a path towards something larger than just surviving. But it also meant dependencies on external groups, exposure to threats beyond our defensive perimeter, commitment to production volumes we might not be able to sustain. "We need to discuss it with the network," I told Rachel, not wanting to make this decision unilaterally. "Give us 2 days to consult with our allied groups. If they agree, we have a deal." The network meeting that evening was contentious. Patricia from Clearwater worried about overextending our resources. Thomas voiced concerns about security during long-distance transports. Michelle saw economic opportunity but wanted guarantees about the convoy's reliability. Vincent wanted detailed security protocols and contingency plans, but it was Connor who asked the question that mattered most. What happens when the flour runs out? We can promise bread for the next 10 months. After that, we're dependent on agricultural yields that might not materialize. How do we negotiate trade agreements when we can't guarantee consistent production beyond our current timeline? The room fell silent, everyone confronting the reality we'd been avoiding. Our value rested on production capacity that had an expiration date. When the flour ran out, our leverage evaporated, and with it, our security and our network's foundation. Then we're honest about the timeline, I decided, feeling the weight of leadership settling heavier across my shoulders. We tell Rachel we can guarantee production for 10 months, with potentially reduced output after that depending on agricultural success. We don't lie. We don't overpromise. We trade based on what we can actually deliver. If that's not enough for the convoy, we maintain local operations and hope it's sufficient. Rachel accepted our terms. 10 months of guaranteed production is enough to establish relationships and trade routes, she said when I presented the conditions. And if your agriculture works, you become even more valuable, a settlement that doesn't just redistribute scavenged resources but actually produces new food. That's the future, Derek. That's what survives long term. The first export shipment departed on day 97. 500 loaves loaded into the convoy's armored trucks, destined for a settlement 50 miles northeast that controlled a pharmaceutical warehouse. In exchange, we received antibiotics, surgical supplies, and medical equipment that would keep our people healthy for months. Samuel, our medic, almost wept when he saw the quality and quantity of the supplies. Production ramped up to 900 loaves daily, pushing everyone to their limits. Connor ran night shifts while I handled days. Jake and Tyler operated supplementary production lines. We trained 4 new bakers from Haven's refugees, teaching them basic techniques so we could scale further. The ovens ran hot enough that the bakery's interior temperature stayed 20 degrees above outside ambient. Bakers working in a constant sheen of sweat that smelled like flour and yeast and desperation. Carl's projections updated daily, tracking consumption against yields, deliveries against receipts. We're producing at rates that consume flour 10% faster than initial estimates, he warned during week 15. If we maintain current output, we hit critical threshold in 9 months instead of 10. We need to either reduce production or find additional supply sources. There was no good answer. Reducing production meant losing trade relationships and network value. Maintaining current rates meant accelerating toward the deadline. Finding more supply sources required dangerous scavenging operations through increasingly hostile territory. We push forward, I decided, knowing it might be the wrong call but unable to see alternatives. We maintain production, honor our commitments, build the relationships that might sustain us when the timeline runs out. Better to be valuable partners other groups want to help than isolated survivors nobody misses when we collapse.